Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We don't need that, right? Bismillah, or does it help with that? If I talk?
Yeah, help.
No, green card, no. Your wife had baby at home.
Maybe I won't talk right directly into it.
Oh, you can.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. So last time we started in the book of manners. Nah, it keeps sliding. Just make it shorter. Because it's too long.
Oh, bring it up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then take. Yeah, that's good. So we started the book of manners, and the first chapter in the book of manners is dealing with the manners related to reciting the Quran. And so the first, and it's a big chapter with regards to the Quran. So we'll be probably in this probably for another class or two. But what we covered last time was, that part of the manners of the Quran is not just that you recite it every day, but that you also contemplate and you reflect over the meaning. And this is part of, the etiquette that we should have with the Quran. That it should be more than just something that we believe in as Muslims, but we should, like he says, consistently recite and study the Quran. And then one of the things he said, you should not say, I forgot the Quran. Instead, we should say, I was made to forget the Quran. And this is kind of what he's saying, is to help us understand that when we forget part of the Quran, then this is a punishment for us. Right? Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he used to complain to his teacher, one of his teachers, Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah, and rahimahullah, and he said that he had a weak memory, and this is Imam Shafi'i, right? He said he used to complain about the weakness of his memory, and Waqi' said his advice to him was, give up sinning. He said, because the Quran is a light, and Allah doesn't give His light of guidance and things like that to the people who sin. And that's we're talking about Imam Shafi'i, right? And so this was his advice. And so when we ponder and reflect over the Quran, we should, if we have this problem with this memory, then it's probably us. And so we can be made to forget the Quran, and it is a punishment for us. It also can be that you're getting old too, because it's more difficult. So he also said it's compulsory to contemplate over the Quran. It's something that you must do. And lastly, we talked about how you can recite the Quran whether you're standing, walking, riding, sitting, or laying down. In any position. So you don't feel like, well, I'm not going to recite the Quran because I'm laying down and I don't want to get up right now. No, you can do all of that. So tonight we're going to look at some of the etiquettes with regards to purification when it deals with the Quran. And so point number 7, he said, only the purified may touch the Quran. And he said that this ruling is based upon the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. It says which, meaning that book with Allah, none can touch but the purified. And so in the translation kind of indicates the point. A lot of people, they think that this ayah is talking about the Quran. لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. No one can touch it, meaning the Quran, except those who have purification. You have wudu or ghusl or whatever. But as some of the scholars of tafsir have mentioned, that this is not the book that is being talked about. It's saying لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, or at least it is a difference of opinion as to what this book is. So some of them say it is talking about Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, the book that is with Allah. And none can touch it but the purified, meaning the angels. And this is what we see from the translation here. But either way, even the scholars who don't believe this ayah is talking about the Quran, they say that it is one of the manners of dealing with the Quran is that you don't touch it except that you're in a state of purification.
So it basically is better being safe than sorry.
Yes, definitely that.
We said do wudu before reading.
Do wudu before
touching
reading the
the Quran.
Quran, and it's not just your hands, because some people say, well, I'm gonna just go wash my hands
No.
and do it.
You gotta be-
So you have to be in a state of purification. And so the Prophet ﷺ, sent an important letter to Amr ibn Hazm radiallahu anhu. It contained, in addition to other matters, legal rulings pertaining to the inheritance law and punishments for crimes. In that letter was written, أن لا يمس القرآن إلا طاهر, and that none touch the Quran except the purified. And this is related by Imam Malik in his Muwatta, which is one of the earliest complete hadith books, even before Bukhari and Muslim and things like that. And Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, he ruled that it is authentic and mentioned that Imam Ahmed ruled by it, and that Ishaq ibn Rahawayh ruled that it is authentic. Right? So even though the ayah before, is a difference of opinion as to whether whether it's talking about the Quran or not, this particular hadith is talking directly about it. And we have the Prophet ﷺ saying, none should touch the Quran except that he's tahir, except that he's in a state of purification, that he's made wudu, and he's made ghusl if he needed to, or she has done the same. So the question is it permissible for one who is in a state of impurity, right, to hold the Quran? Not read it, not open it, but they're asking, can someone who does not have wudu hold the Quran via a barrier, such as a piece of cloth, right? You wrap it up in a cloth, or it has some type of thing, and the cloth, or the cloth of one's garment, like you don't have wudu, and so you take the Quran and you wrap it up in your shirt to carry it someplace.
Like a non-Muslim or a Muslim?
Non-Muslim or Muslim.
Right.
So the answer, he says, yes, one may hold the Quran via a barrier, because in doing so, one is not physically touching the Quran. Shaykh al-Islam, meaning Ibn Taymiyyah, issued this ruling and said that it applies regardless of whether the cloth used is that of a man, a woman, or a child, or regardless of whether one holds it from above or below. And he said, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So it is something that is allowed. So we're dealing with purification. None can touch the Quran except for someone who's pure, except if there's some type of barrier. Like if you put on some gloves and you can hold the Quran because it's a barrier.
Or let's say, I mean, it's kind of excusable though. Like say if if somebody's doing dawah, like outside, let's say somebody's just letting people know about Islam and stuff like that, and a non-believer comes up and asks a question or whatever and says something like he wants a Quran. So
Right. So
gives him the Quran.
usually you give him an English translation that's completely English, no Arabic in it.
Right.
But if you give it and it has Arabic and English, it's still not considered the actual Quran. The actual Quran is when it is totally Arabic. Right.
It just it does
Yeah.
seem different. But it's still good in mind for it to still, even if it's English translation, to still make full sense.
Right, and just to teach them a particular etiquette with the Quran,
Right,
because as disbelievers, we used to
But
read
you don't
stuff
wanna
in the
put
bathroom.
on-
You'd be in the bathroom reading something, reading the Bible or something.
You can't do that with the
Yeah.
Quran. Yeah.
and even they shouldn't
I
do it with
just,
the
that's
Bible.
just common sense. You know what I mean? Like you have
You
good
think-
intentions. You have good intentions, but at the same time, yeah, like you said, it's
Yeah,
good
customs.
emphasis. It's good
Customs
emphasis.
going on.
It's good emphasis.
So he says, although it is permissible to carry the Quran in one's pocket, he says it is not permissible for one to carry it when one enters the toilet. So you have the Quran in your pocket and you walk into the bathroom, that's not good.
So what do you do with it? What if you
Before entering, one should leave it in an appropriate place,
like?
so as to show honor and veneration for the Quran. But if one is forced to enter with it because he fears if I leave it outside it's going to be stolen,
Exactly.
or he's allowed to take it into the washroom with him for necessity in that case, right? There has to be a real fear.
Put it on the baby. What
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Or keep it wrapped up, try to cover it,
Yeah.
So, also, even if you're in a state of impurity, he says the permissibility of reciting the Quran from memory for one who is in a minor state of impurity. So if you're in a major, like you have to perform ghusl, you've ejaculated, right? Or a woman is in her menses, or no, not even in her menses. Let's say you didn't ejaculate. Let's say you did have. That's one. No, but that's one. Or if you had intercourse and you did not ejaculate,
You have to shower immediately.
right? You don't have to shower immediately, but you cannot recite the Quran when you're in that state of janabah.
I thought you have to, like, you masturbate, you have to,
You should,
like, immediately.
but if you don't, I mean, you don't want to stay in
Not
that thing.
immediately, but yeah, just
Before prayer,
Before you lay
before
down.
reciting the Quran or even touching the Quran. So this is
Makes sense.
permissibility of reciting the Quran from memory for one who's in a minor state, meaning that you just don't have wudu. You don't have to have wudu to recite the Quran, but you cannot be in a major state of impurity. So he says if one is junub, meaning in a major state of impurity, this results, for instance, like we just mentioned, engaging in sexual intercourse or having a wet dream, and one continues to remain in this state until he takes a shower, until he makes ghusl. He said it is categorically forbidden for him to recite the Quran. If you're in that state, you can't even recite the Quran. This is one of the etiquettes that shows our respect for the Quran, that there's a state that we can't even recite it.
And
So he says, which means he can't even recite it, which means that he may neither touch it or read from it directly, nor recite it from memory.
So I heard that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam always was in a state of purification.
No.
He liked to always be in a pure state. I'm not saying he was always.
Yeah.
He would
That,
like to-
when he
preferred
wasn't
to.
in it, he would make it. Like if he broke his wudu, he would remake the wudu.
Right.
Yeah, and stuff like that. Ali radiallahu anhu said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite the Quran to us as long as he was not junub, meaning when he was not in a state of major impurity. Which means also that they knew that he was in a state of impurity, It says, but if one is in a minor state of impurity, which results, for example, from sleeping, passing wind, defecating, urinating, then it's permissible for him to at least recite the Quran from memory. Discussing the time when he spent the night at the home of his aunt Maymuna, radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. I know that's kind of confusing. So, the Prophet's wife's name was Maymuna, one of them.
Yeah.
And Abdullah ibn Abbas, it was his aunt. Right? Because he's the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abbas is the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, in the middle of the night, or just before or just after, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam woke up, sat up, wiped the sleep from his face with his hands. He then recited the last 10 verses of Surah Ali Imran, after which he stood up to a canteen that was suspended or tied, and then he made ablution, performing it well. So the point here is that the Prophet ﷺ recited the Quran after sleeping and before performing wudu, right? So this shows that it's allowed to recite even if you're in a state of minor impurity. So they say, true, it's better and more complete to recite the Quran when you're in a state of purification. That's better, right? But you don't have to. Nonetheless, neither blame nor criticism should be leveled at the one who recites it while being in a minor state of impurity. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was once with a group of people who were reciting the Quran. He left them to go relieve himself, to go use the bathroom. And as he was returning, he was reciting the Quran. Right? He just left the bathroom, he's come back reciting the Quran. A man said to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, do you recite the Quran without having made wudu? Omar rejoined him, he said, who issued this ruling to you? Right? And you always had to be careful with Omar. Right? You say something like that, and he's about to, he's not only is he going to check you verbally, he had a stick that he used to hit people in the head with when they would say like innovation and stuff like that. He would people were like, bah, you know, and then he would ask them again, and then they would change their mind. You know? He said, who issued this ruling to you? Was it Musaylama? Musaylama was a false prophet, and he came towards the end of the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. And he said, and he talked to him, and he said, he wrote him a letter, and he said, hey, I'm a prophet too, right? And then the Prophet ﷺ, he called him a liar, right? But he became a very dangerous man after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, because a lot of the people of his tribe, even though they believed in the Prophet ﷺ, they held on to their people, their tribe. And they said, a truthful man from Quraysh, he said, a liar from our tribe, Banu Hanifa, is better than a truthful man from Quraysh. And so they fought against him. And many of the memorizers of the Quran, they died in the battles. So this was after this, there was what was called the apostasy wars. And he was one of these false prophets that stood up. But alhamdulillah, he was neutralized.
That's one of the scariest things for me, and that's why it made me want to really learn Arabic, because somebody could just be, I saw a clip of this guy, he was very knowledgeable, you know what I mean, but he was actually, and I'm sitting up here listening to him, but then at the end, his plot was to kind of like, if you're not really paying attention to it, he was promoting Christianity. You know what I mean? So you have to really pay attention, because he knew Arabic and all of that. He knew the Quran. I'm like, it was crazy. It was like really scary.
So someone asked the question, is it permissible for a person who's in a minor state of impurity to read directly from the Quran while touching it, right? So we know that you can just recite from memory. But can you read the Quran without
Well, you can't pray.
What do you think? No, we're not talking about prayer. Just reading the Quran.
What was the question?
Can you read the Quran without wudu?
No, you just said it. You said you can't recite it.
Right. So they said the Permanent Council for Scientific Research, Lajnatul Da'ima, they said if one is junub in a major state of impurity, he may not recite the Quran until he takes a shower. He may neither read the Quran directly nor recite it from memory, and only after one is completely purified from both minor and major states of impurity may he read directly from the Quran. So you have to do that. Which is better for the reader, to read from memory or to read directly from the Quran? The scholars are in disagreement concerning this issue. Some hold that it's better to read from one's memory, while others maintain it's better to read directly from the Quran. The latter group represents the majority of the scholars, right? Majority of the scholars say it's better to read directly from the Quran, to have the Mus'haf in front of
Yeah,
you.
because without that, you wouldn't memorize it.
They say it's better because there is added precision and blessings of seeing the Quran. Right? If you recite from your memory, you don't see the Quran. Right? And they said blessings are not necessarily tangible or directly felt. They said, however, there's a third group whose opinion in the matter lies somewhere in between. Ibn Kathir says, some scholars say, the matter really revolves around humility and presence of the heart. If these are found in greater abundance from reading from your memory, then that's better. And if it's better to look at it and you get more humility and presence of the heart by reading, then that's better, right? And that's the one that seems
I think with me, that would apply.
I would say, yeah, that I
Reading
definitely like
it
that.
from the Quran.
Yeah, because that, I mean, think about it. In order to memorize it, you have to read from the Quran in the first place. You know what I mean? Imagine somebody when they first start reading the Quran, that feeling that you get. Just like you're saying, you're gonna always get that, you know, because you're physically seeing that Quran. Now, you might get the same feeling. just
For
reciting.
me, like my attention is on what I'm reading.
Yeah.
But I'm
Memory
just
fades.
reciting it like I can think about all kinds of stuff while I'm praying.
The-
Reciting Fatiha, I can think about lunch,
Yeah, because it happens.
you know,
It
basketball, anything, and I'm just reciting.
So Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, was a great scholar in the Hanbali madhab. He said, whoever has a copy of the Quran should at the very least
Memorize.
read a few verses directly from it every day. And so that it does not become abandoned. Even if you're a hafid of Quran, if you have a mushaf, you should be looking at it. Even if it's just a few verses every day. Is this something that's mandatory? No. But this is an advice. So, from number 9, it says the permissibility of reciting the Quran for menstruating women and women experience postnatal bleeding. So we said, so a woman who's going through her menses, she cannot pray. She's in a major state of impurity. But it's a different major state than janaba, right? If she were to have intercourse or she were to ejaculate or something like that, she would not be able to recite the Quran, not be able to read from it. But when she's going through her menses, right, she's on her period, or she's in that time after she's had a baby and there's that bleeding, there is a permissibility. So he says there's no authentic proof in which it is established that these two categories of women may not recite the Quran. Nonetheless, we know for sure that they may not touch it. Right? So the permanent committee said there is nothing wrong in these two categories of women reciting the Quran without touching it. Menstruating women and women experiencing postnatal bleeding. This is the stronger of the two opinions held by the different scholars in this issue. And because there is no authentic proof established from the Prophet ﷺ that indicates a prohibition in this regard.
So you said they can't read the Quran.
So they can read it,
They can.
but they cannot touch it. And they can recite it. And so some of the scholars say if she touches it with gloves,
Some of them do
or
stick
they'll
there.
open it and they'll have like a pencil and they'll use the eraser to turn the pages. So some of the scholars have allowed that for the women, and just in those two cases, what we call hayd and nifas, right? Period and postpartum bleeding. In those two cases, she can read and recite, right? And the reason they say that is allowed because there's no evidence to say that they can't. So he also says it is recommended, and we'll make this the last one. It is recommended to clean one's mouth with siwak or miswak before reciting the Quran. It's mustahab. It's not obligatory. It is something that's good to do, right? Part of the etiquette with the Quran is that you don't recite it with the dragon breath. You don't have the bad breath, gingivitis or whatever. So he says, one does this showing good manners to and veneration for Allah's speech. I mean, but think about this, right? For us that have been Christians before, right? We never, no matter how much you may have loved the Bible, you never was like, I can't touch it in this state.
No, I never.
Now you do not.
You can't. You never was like, man. Let me before I recite the Bible, if it wasn't something we did.
No.
Let me go brush my teeth. You know, right?
Y'all didn't do that?
Let me not take the. You know, did you wrap the Bible up in a thing like
I
that?
can do all of that.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying? So it shows that this respect for that the Quran is an actual holy book, right?
It's one God.
Yeah, and we treat it like that, right?
So is there a Bible that's over,
The
overseas?
original?
Yeah. There's
No,
no.
it's been too long. There are some that are early,
It's been too long.
and they should respect it, and then we should respect it as, you know, even if we know that the majority of it is corrupt, we know that
some of it.
some of it has come from Allah,
Yeah.
some of it has knowledge, and we should be better than them.
Because it says that it doesn't say that we're supposed to still. I wouldn't say follow, but be mindful of the Torah.
But the Quran, as we'll talk about later, is part of the etiquette is that we understand that the Quran is what is called muhaymin, and it is in charge. It is over all of the books.
Yeah.
They have to, for us to even look at those books, they have to agree with the Quran. We look to the Quran to check them, not the other way around. Right? So he says, so if one intends to recite Allah's speech, he does well to clean his mouth and give it a good smell with siwak or anything else which cleanliness is achieved. So if you can't get a miswak, you can do gargle some mouthwash.
I did
You
both
know?
of those.
I know a brother used to take the oil right there on the roll on, he would put it on his tongue. It tastes nasty.
Yeah, all those.
But it made it, you know. It says this saying of Hudayfa, radiallahu anhu. And Hudayfa was a companion that the Prophet ﷺ trusted with the identities of the hypocrites. Right? And he didn't trust any other companion with this identity. So Hudayfa, it indicates to the effect of this said practice. So he said when the Prophet ﷺ would wake up at night for tahajjud, he would rub and clean his mouth with a siwak. So just getting ready for the prayer, he would do that. Right? And so he's saying that this is connected to that. So like I said, we're going to end here and we'll pick up from 11. So just remember.
It's good if you have it, but like,
Yeah, you don't have to.
if you can afford a bunch of them, then you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, this way you get them for free, especially in Ramadan.
I still got some in mine.
Yeah. But I've only got two my whole life.
Oh no, Dad, you'll get them.
You want tea?
I've had brothers bring them back.
And they were during
You
Ramadan.
want tea?
Kids always bring them back from Umrah. You know?
I'm good, but I get some after.
But that's the thing. So let's go back over. When it comes to purification with the Quran, we want to have, we want to be in a state of purity. That's the best thing, right? Especially if we're going to touch the Quran, we need to be in a state of purity. Otherwise, we can hold it if there's a barrier, right? We hold it like that. And again, this is part of the respect that we give the Quran. If we're in a state of janaba, right? You've ejaculated, you've come across that, or you've had intercourse, but you didn't ejaculate. The moment the private parts touch, that means ghusl is mandatory, whether or not you finished.
Clothed or unclothed?
clothed. I mean, yeah, unclothed.
I was about to say, I was like, that's what I was.
Yeah, it's not just.
I'm just
Where do
saying,
you
like,
drive?
I'm thinking.
We're not talking about
I'm just saying, like, if I get married one day and then my wife sits on my lap.
It's not about bump and grind, you know. You know. But let's see if you do that, right? But if you're in a state of janaba, you can't. Not only can you not touch the Quran, except that you have this barrier, but you also cannot even recite the Quran. Now, women who are in a different type of major impurity, like we said, hayd and nifas, if they are in their menses, if they are on their postpartum bleeding, they can recite the Quran, but they cannot touch it directly, right? They cannot directly touch the Quran. If you don't have wudu, can you recite it?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
You can't touch
If
it.
you don't have wudu, can you recite the Quran?
Yeah, but you can't pray.
From
I don't
memory.
get the question.
From memory.
If you don't have wudu,
Yeah. You didn't make wudu. You're not in a state of purity.
You can say what you remember.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't pray.
I thought it just said you cannot. If you're not in a state
No,
of
you
purification.
can't touch
No,
it.
you're not in. So.
You talking about a woman?
No, us. You can't read it, but you can like say it out
Yeah,
your
you can say it
head.
from your memory. But
But
if
you
you
can't
want
pray.
to open up the Quran, right, you should have.
He
wudu.
wrote a short book.
No, I
You
literally
gotta
thought I
work
was
with it.
just paying attention. And it's just, you know what I mean? I got
Well,
a
and
quick second.
this is why we have to continuously keep reading back and
Yeah,
forth.
because I thought.
And then lastly, it is recommended to use the miswak, but it's not obligatory. So, but we should respect the Quran and hold it and in this high, yeah, we should cherish it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us those people who are true carriers of the Quran and that we give it the respect that it deserves. That means, subhanakallah wa bihamdik, shalla la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.